For 3 decades, Johnny Carson ruled late-night television with unmatched charm, quick wit, and a calm presence that made guests feel comfortable enough to reveal sides of themselves rarely seen anywhere else. From his desk at NBC, he welcomed the biggest stars in America into millions of homes, creating a space where legends laughed, stories flowed freely, and cultural moments were quietly shaped. The Tonight Show became more than entertainment. It became a mirror of American society as it slowly changed. But when people let their guard down, uncomfortable truths sometimes surfaced, especially as attitudes about identity and equality shifted over time. The relaxed format and long conversations occasionally revealed outdated views that more controlled appearances kept hidden, leaving behind a historical record many viewers prefer to forget. Carson found himself balancing two worlds, welcoming stars who rose during an era when certain attitudes were normalized while hosting a growing audience that increasingly questioned them. He was navigating a changing country in real time, one where ideas once accepted were now being challenged. His approach was rarely confrontational. Instead, he relied on tone, distance, and subtle redirection, letting viewers notice the shift without turning the show into a battleground. Over time, those changes became more visible. One of the most iconic figures to sit across from Carson was John Wayne, a symbol of rugged independence and classic Americana. His screen image represented fairness, strength, and honor, and Carson treated him with respect reserved for legends. Yet outside the studio, Wayne expressed opinions that clashed sharply with the more inclusive vision of America emerging at the time. Once those views became public, Carson's demeanor shifted. The warmth of earlier conversations cooled. The laughs became more restrained. The respect remained, but the closeness faded. Carson never challenged him directly, but careful viewers could feel the distance. It was a quiet acknowledgement that admiration for talent did not equal agreement with personal beliefs. Bob Hope presented a different challenge. He was comedy royalty, beloved across generations, known for entertaining troops and shaping American humor. But much of his early work relied on caricatures common in his formative years. As standards evolved, Hope resisted change, often dismissing criticism rather than reflecting on impact. During later appearances, Carson's reaction spoke volumes. Smiles tightened. Conversations moved quickly. Carson didn't laugh along as freely as before. He honored Hope's legacy while signaling that the old jokes no longer landed the same way. It was respect mixed with restraint. Charlton Heston arrived with towering presence and a career filled with iconic roles. As his political voice grew louder later in life, his public statements increasingly downplayed ongoing social struggles, framing them as issues of the past. Carson responded by steering conversations away from politics and toward film history, carefully avoiding moments that could divide the audience. Behind the scenes, staff were aware of the contrast between Heston's dignified on-screen image and his private remarks. On air, Carson maintained courtesy while limiting opportunities for controversy, choosing containment over confrontation. Don Rickles tested boundaries like no other. His comedy was built on sharp insults aimed at everyone, and for years he existed in a strange space where audiences accepted behavior that would end other careers. Carson genuinely liked Rickles, which complicated matters. While allowing him more freedom than most guests, Carson still drew lines. Certain words were off-limits. Certain jokes ended segments early. It was a balancing act between affection and responsibility. Supporters argued Rickles spared no one. Critics argued the impact mattered more than intent. Carson walked the line carefully, letting viewers decide. Burt Reynolds brought charm, charisma, and a laid-back energy that audiences adored. Most of the time, his humor reflected warmth and self-awareness, but occasionally remarks surfaced that felt out of step with changing sensibilities. One appearance triggered an unusual wave of viewer complaints. Carson responded quietly but decisively by removing the segment from reruns. No public scolding, no on-air explanation, just action. It was Carson's way of acknowledging a misstep without humiliating a guest he otherwise respected. Red Skelton represented comedy's earliest television roots, a performer Carson admired deeply, but Skelton struggled to accept that some traditions he grew up with no longer resonated. When he voiced frustration over changing standards, audience reactions grew colder. Carson responded by gently redirecting conversations and emphasizing Skelton's achievements rather than his opinions. The laughter told its own story. Viewers had moved on, even if the performer hadn't. Buddy Hackett remained firmly anchored in an earlier era, resisting adaptation even as standards shifted around him. His material sparked repeated complaints, eventually prompting Carson to place firm restrictions on what could air. While still welcoming him back, Carson made it clear certain routines were finished. It was one of the few times Carson intervened directly, signaling that boundaries were no longer optional. Across these moments, a pattern emerges. Johnny Carson didn't cancel guests or lecture them. He adjusted tone, limited space, redirected conversations, and sometimes quietly removed material. His method reflected the era he lived in: cautious, incremental, and often incomplete. The Tonight Show became a snapshot of America learning in real time, sometimes stumbling, sometimes progressing, rarely moving in a straight line. Looking back, Carson's legacy isn't one of perfection, but of transition. He reflected a country wrestling with its past, while unsure how to confront it directly. His restraint mirrored mainstream television's approach during decades of rapid social change. The Tonight Show neither fully ignored uncomfortable truths nor aggressively challenged them. It occupied the uneasy middle ground where much of American media lived at the time. When Carson signed off for the final time, the work wasn't finished, but the evolution was visible. His handling of difficult guests offers a revealing look at how entertainment slowly began reckoning with its own history, not through dramatic showdowns, but through subtle shifts that spoke just as loudly to those paying attention. Carson's genius lay not only in his wit and timing, but in his understanding of nuance. He knew that television audiences were changing, that the American public was becoming more aware of inequities and injustices that had long been normalized, yet he also knew that abrupt confrontation could alienate viewers and disrupt the delicate balance that made his show both entertaining and accessible. His approach was to navigate these tensions quietly, allowing the audience to sense when a guest's perspective was out of step with evolving values, without creating on-air conflict that would overshadow the show's entertainment purpose. In doing so, Carson created a subtle dialogue between host, guest, and viewer. For example, with guests whose humor or opinions reflected outdated biases, he often used small shifts in expression, brief pauses, or gentle changes in tone to signal disapproval. These moments, almost imperceptible to some, were not only a reflection of his personal values, but also a form of commentary, an acknowledgement that certain attitudes no longer resonated with contemporary audiences. In essence, Carson was both an entertainer and an unspoken guide, showing millions of viewers what respect and fairness might look like in social interactions, even when the words themselves were problematic. Carson also had a way of balancing affection with accountability. He could laugh with a guest, genuinely appreciate their artistry, and simultaneously draw a subtle line that made it clear when a joke or comment crossed a boundary. This careful calibration required an extraordinary sense of timing, empathy, and social awareness. A joke that might have passed unnoticed on stage could take on a very different meaning when broadcast into millions of homes. Carson understood that context mattered, and he often adjusted his approach accordingly. Throughout his tenure, he witnessed the evolution of American comedy, and with it, the growing tension between tradition and progress. Comedy that relied on stereotypes or outdated assumptions slowly became less acceptable. Yet Carson often faced the dilemma of working with legends who had built entire careers on such material. His solution was rarely direct confrontation. Instead, he guided the conversation away from potentially offensive territory while still maintaining the show's momentum. This strategy allowed him to preserve the legacy of his guests without endorsing views that no longer reflected the values of his audience. What makes Carson's approach fascinating is how it mirrors broader societal shifts. The Tonight Show wasn't simply a platform for celebrity appearances. It was a cultural barometer. Observing who he welcomed, how he reacted to their remarks, and when he subtly distanced himself, provides a snapshot of America in transition. The country was slowly acknowledging inequities, yet many were uncomfortable confronting them openly. Carson's interactions captured this tension in real time, offering a glimpse of social evolution as it happened. Even when faced with particularly challenging guests, Carson rarely lost his composure. He understood the stakes. An overly confrontational approach could alienate viewers, but complete passivity risked appearing complicit. He found a middle ground, using humor, charm, and subtle cues to communicate disapproval while still keeping the conversation engaging. These moments required viewers to pay attention, to notice the shifts in tone, body language, and phrasing that signaled something deeper than the surface-level banter. Carson also understood the power of context and timing. A remark that might have seemed acceptable in the 1960s could feel deeply problematic a decade later. He adjusted accordingly, demonstrating an awareness of the broader cultural conversation. His reactions, though often understated, reflected an evolving understanding of social responsibility. The Tonight Show became not just a space for laughter, but a mirror reflecting the changing expectations of American audiences. At the same time, Carson's approach reminds us that progress often comes incrementally. There were no grand proclamations or sweeping gestures on The Tonight Show. Instead, change occurred quietly, through subtle signals and careful curation. By adjusting his interactions, moderating content, and selectively steering conversations, Carson modeled a form of influence that relied on persuasion rather than confrontation. His work underscores the idea that cultural change is rarely instantaneous. It is shaped by countless small decisions, moments of restraint, and acts of careful consideration. Carson also offered lessons in empathy and the complexity of human character. Many of his guests were immensely talented individuals whose public personas often masked contradictions or biases. By engaging with them respectfully while maintaining subtle boundaries, Carson highlighted the possibility of appreciating someone's talent without endorsing every aspect of their worldview. This nuanced approach is particularly instructive in today's climate, where conversations about accountability and legacy continue to challenge public figures and audiences alike. The Tonight Show's extended format provided the perfect laboratory for this delicate balancing act. In long-form interviews, guests could reveal their personalities fully, including both admirable and problematic traits. Carson's skill was in navigating these moments with finesse, creating an environment where audiences could enjoy entertainment while also witnessing the gradual evolution of social standards. This dual function, entertainment and subtle social commentary, is part of what made his show so culturally significant. Looking back, it is clear that Carson's influence extended far beyond comedy and celebrity culture. He helped shape how television could respond to social change without alienating viewers, showing that hosts could engage difficult topics thoughtfully, even when direct confrontation was not feasible. His legacy lies not in perfection, but in the model of subtle engagement, the demonstration that entertainment could reflect evolving values without abandoning its primary purpose, to entertain, connect, and engage audiences. Even decades later, the lessons from Carson's Tonight Show resonate. Modern hosts continue to wrestle with similar tensions, balancing respect for guests with accountability for their words, navigating humor with sensitivity, and responding to evolving social expectations. Carson's strategies, gentle redirection, subtle distancing, and careful attention to audience reaction, remain instructive for anyone seeking to entertain while maintaining cultural awareness. Perhaps most importantly,